MeatEater's World News Headquarters in Bozeman, Montana. This is Cal's Week in Review with Ryan Cal Callahan. Now, here's Cal.
This week's special drop of Cal's Week in Review is really not a spin-off, but it's going to give you some early access into a future Cal in the Field episode, something you're going to see a bunch of on the MeatEater YouTube channel and elsewhere, more than likely, of striper fishing, which would be like the hook, no pun intended, of the show. That's like the action, the fun part, but really what we're talking about is catch and release mortality, what this fishery means to Massachusetts. And yeah, I said that right. Massachusetts is where we are. So a lot of people think stripers like Jamaica Bay or even West Coast stripers. Massachusetts is a state that's just like slightly to the north or slightly severely east if you're talking West Coast stripers. But super cool fishery, and I got kind of in touch with this idea, not kind of, but like very much in touch with this idea through Backcountry Hunters and Anglers, Chris Borgatti. Chris, what do you do?
I am the Eastern Policy and Conservation Manager for BHA.
And why here? Why this?
Why this? Well, a lot of what I do, the fact that I do this job and live where I live, is because of striped bass. So this is, of all the many issues that I get to work on in over 20 states in the eastern U.S., like this one is kind of like a personal passion project. And it was an issue that I got involved with as a volunteer with BHA. Our chapter chair, Mike Woods, and I were talking about like how we make our chapter distinct as the New England chapter, and in terms of the issues that we cover and coastal issues, and we came up, and then right behind that was striped bass, because it is a fishery that links the entire region, and if you fish saltwater, you probably are fishing for striped bass. So yeah.
And to pull, I guess, the podcast curtain back even further, this New England chapter of BHA and Chris Borgatti and Mike Woods have been like very good about keeping me and the podcast in the loop as far as like what's going on with coastal conservation and stripers and some of the bait fish like menhaden issues that we've covered on the show for years now. So that's the connection there. And then Chris introduced me to these two folks that I'm going to introduce right now, which would be Bill Hoffman. And I've been saying your name all week because I think it's like the most New England name.
It's Irish, but yeah.
But I can't remember your last name right now, Ben.
Yeah, Gahagan.
Gahagan.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is super fun to say. Gahagan. Bill, what do you do?
So I am a senior marine biologist for the Division of Marine Fisheries, and I run our fisheries research and monitoring program. So it's kind of two parts. So the fisheries research is what we're going to be talking about a lot more today, and the fisheries monitoring, it's kind of the parallel to the observer program, if you ever heard about the federal observer program, but it's a lot smaller scale. We have a small team of biologists that we put out on commercial fishing vessels to collect information, as well as people dockside. So when the commercial boats come in, land fish, they'll collect biological information that's used for management and biological purposes like stock assessments.
Yeah, we chatted a little bit about that when we first got here, and folks who listen closely to the podcast, we've covered some of the interesting stories that come out of being an observer on a boat far out at sea, right? Because that person doesn't come in necessarily trusted all the time or inherently well-liked, because you could say, you guys are catching too much of this, you can't fish for it anymore.
Yeah, I mean, the idea is behind the observer program and what we do, it's that it's non-biased data, and that's how you try to, and you want to make sure they're clear that you don't want to alter their fishing behavior. But if they don't understand what the program is, then yeah, there's a lot of resentment for you being there. They just want to go fishing and do their job, and they don't want to have to deal with your scales and all your protocols and stuff like that. And there's safety protocols that they need to abide by. So it can be difficult, but a good observer will kind of get over that hump quickly. So, but it can be very challenging. And the one thing about it, I will say, it's like it's not for everyone. I think the turnover at the federal level is like 6 months. I did it for 3 years before I came and started working for the Division of Marine Fisheries. So obviously I was like a grizzly veteran by then. And you gotta love everything about fishing. To do it and be good at it, you have to be obsessed with fishing, and luckily I am. So
and that's the only way you're gonna get over that hump too. Like you got to connect with those people on the boat, make if not friends, but you got to make communication fast.
Absolutely, and in fact, I am really good friends with a lot of them. You know, as evidence is yesterday when we were in the field and we saw that harpoon go off and steam off black smoke. I knew that guy. I knew it. So I texted him. He was like, "Yep, I saw a tuna fish right over here," and he would steam off. So that's pretty cool to be out there and see that.
Yeah, for sure. All right, Ben Gahagan.
Yeah. I am also a biologist at the Division of Marine Fisheries. I am currently the recreational fisheries program leader. So I have a small staff. You met Matt out in the field with us. He's one of my staff members, and we got 4 more. And we in Massachusetts do a fair number of things with our recreational program. A big component of that is doing the MRIP survey. So that's the way we do dockside interviews. And then there's a follow-up telephone interview that's administered by the federal government, but we estimate all of the effort and catch of a lot of the recreational species that way by going out and sending staff out to interview people, like at Cashman's Landing. That's one of our prime spots up here on the North Shore where you guys visited today or yesterday to go interview some people. That's a really popular spot where we interview anglers. We also do a lot of public access work, rebuilding ramps and piers, getting walk-in spots, beach access, things like that, so that our anglers can access the shoreline. And then we do a fair amount of making sure that we are staying in touch with our stakeholders. Just like Bill reached out to that commercial fisherman yesterday, you know, like Chris was there on the boat with Matt. Matt was working the phones and the radio the entire time the last 2 days trying to figure out where the striped bass were so we could find those and get some good fishing in if we couldn't find fish on our own. And I was talking to people as well, texting. So it's great to work as a community. It's kind of a big part of what we're trying to do with the fisheries program is build that idea of a community with our 4 hire captains, our recreational anglers, about our biological staff, like everybody at Division of Marine Fisheries. So we're all working together to improve that resource.
And Ben, I guess quick question just to set this up. Is Mass Fisheries part of like Mass Fish and Wildlife? Or how's it structured in the state of Massachusetts?
Yeah, everybody, as you know, Cal, you've been around every state's a little bit different.
Yeah.
So here in Massachusetts, we have a Department of Fish and Game. It's inside in Massachusetts. I don't know if I've ever seen this in other states. It's like secretariats. It's really weird. So like there's the governor, then there's secretaries, and they have a secretariat under it. So we're with Energy and Environmental Affairs, Department of Fish and Game, and then we are a division of Marine Fisheries. There's a division of Ecological Restoration. And then there's the Division of Fisheries and Wildlife, which is our inland fisheries folks and wildlife biologists.
Okay.
And then we have an Office of Fishing and Boating Access as well.
Okay.
So we have these 4 kind of groups under the Department of Fish and Game.
And then in Massachusetts, like we all went on and got our bizarrely, even for a non-resident, $10 marine fisheries stamp or saltwater fisheries stamp.
Yeah, permit.
Or permit or validation or whatever it is, but it's online, easy to find, and it's $10. You should just get it if you drive through the state.
Yeah.
That is what part of your funding? How does Massachusetts work?
It's pretty cool. A lot of states, this is kind of a federally mandated thing about 16 years ago, where either states could create a saltwater license or the feds were going to have their own registry and they were going to charge $10. So a lot of states did a license, some states didn't, some states still don't have a license. But in Massachusetts, not only did we do the $10 license, but we created a dedicated fund. So we have this dedicated fund. If your $10 goes straight to marine fisheries, it has to be used to improve recreational fishing. and at least a third of it has to be used on public access, which is a huge deal, especially in Massachusetts, where as we go up and down fishing, you see how hard public access could be with the amount of houses on the shoreline. So it's great that we can go out and create sites for people to access the beach, fish, boat ramps, all of that. And so we pay for some staff, we pay for research, we pay for restoration. A big part is public access, and then we also pay for research. And that, so we have state funding as well that goes into recreational fisheries. We have some federal funding that goes into recreational fisheries, but that saltwater license money has allowed us to expand what we do staff-wise and project-wise immensely. And especially when we talk about special research projects like you guys were helping us with the last few days, that's a huge part of that is coming from that saltwater license money.
Got it. And then overall picture, most states are funded primarily, at least the money that they use to match for federal dollars, it's all coming from license and tag revenue sales. Is Mass kind of the same way?
Yeah, we use this for federal match, which is great. Obviously, Wallop Pro and all that. So we get to go turn around and use this money to match with federal funding because it's never been federalized. So we can use it for match. Yeah. So it is a big way we do that.
But Mass isn't like you're not pulling cash out of the general pool tax dollars, right?
We do pull some as well. Yeah, we do.
Fund.
Yep, we do as well. But we're a small state. We're kind of stuck in that lowest bracket of Wallop Pro. So almost every year we're fully maxed out.
Yeah.
And unless we see a really big boost in license sales, which is probably an unrealistic level of license sales, we probably won't ever step up a tier in that.
Got it.
It's still a small state relatively.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
So, I think like really the topic here, and we'll talk about the research is you're a state on the ocean, on the Atlantic. And so every species, I assume, doesn't just solely belong to the state of Massachusetts, right? Like every species out there that folks are angling for is connected to states to the north and south, and a lot of species to the entire Atlantic seaboard, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
Yeah.
And striped bass is obviously a perfect example of one. It's Massachusetts is home for its summer grounds. This is where they all come to feed. Not all, but a majority of the population comes up here in the summer. But on that way, it comes all the way from like Virginia and the Chesapeake Bay area and their winter areas. Now it used to be more even closer to North Carolina, but now it's shifted a little bit further north. Now it's like Virginia. They go into the estuaries, the Chesapeake, Hudson, Delaware to spawn. And then they all come up the coast and they come up to us. And so everybody gets a shot at them. And it is the single most important recreational fish and sought after fish on the East Coast.
Yeah, striped bass are a great example, but we have a lot of other species that do it. And I think we talked briefly about it, but a lot of those species are managed by the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission. So we have our state level management, but a lot of our broad management mandates come from ASMFC, and then we make state level decisions and regulations around it. But it is cool. It is like that striped bass, as Bill was saying, is like that fish that you think of it as your fish, but it's everybody's fish because it's passing through all these different waters. We should be thinking about ways it really unites us. And it's interesting because Bill's talking about how it's like the summering grounds here, and everybody up and down the coast gets a shot. So it's very important to Massachusetts. It's like we back with the envelope calculations, we think it's like $600 million a year in economic activity in Massachusetts alone. So that's big money for coastal communities in Massachusetts. But we also have a huge impact coast-wide on the population because in any given year we have the third highest commercial quota, and that's just locked in every year. We're going to be the third highest. But our recreational effort and mortality is typically like first or second in the entire range. And it's usually like us, Maryland, and maybe New Jersey, and then there's a big drop off. It's not like just like we're a little poke ahead. We're usually way, way up there, millions of fish.
And Chris.
I was just going to say part of that too, and you fish for stripers in other states, so you probably experienced in the last few days that people here fishing for them in a different style and way. And then that time period that they're here in our waters, say roughly May into October, sometimes even later, it's a big chunk of the year. And plus, there's fish that are hanging around. There's fish that are migrating by that then have to migrate back. So as you kind of said in your intro, like this is a great place to be in terms of fishing for these things.
And Chris, you're a conservation professional, but you're not a wildlife professional, fisheries professional, and you grew up here.
Yep.
And what's your take on the fishery itself? Like, where are we at for population?
So, as an angler, like I am.
We shouldn't even say population. We
Yeah.
should say just where are we at?
So-
like, is fishing good?
Yeah, so like one of the things I do have a science background, so I always catch myself like my experience is so subjective, and how I fish is a lot different than a lot of other people fish. I like to be really place based in my hunting and my fishing. So where we are here today, I spend most of the time. So I know so many of like the little nooks and crannies how fish move through this particular system, when they show up, when they typically leave, where I can like if the fishing's really slow, where I might be able to find a few little schoolies that I can get into. So in the 18, 19 years that I've been living here, I mean, I've seen a big sort of change. When I first got here, it was gangbusters. I caught my biggest striper very close to where we are right here, which was over 50 inches, in a time of year when the big fish aren't supposed to be here. Like that's the common knowledge, but they were here for a period of time over those years. But those fish aren't here anymore. Those fish are gone.
And just for reference, like a 50-inch striper is generally like weight size how much?
Well, it depends on the time of year. So this is a migratory fish. So this was in May. So it had migrated from where it's wintering ground. So it was a little bit leaner than if I'd caught that fish this time of year in July. So it was probably in the low 40s. Typically a fish of that size, which these guys can answer know better than I, but you're probably talking like a fish that is over 18 years old. And that's obviously a lot of trips back and up and down the coast.
Like in fatty, when it's in its prime, been gorging. How heavy is that?
October.
Yeah. 50 plus.
Yeah.
The rule of thumb is 50 inches, and the end of the season can be up to 50 pounds. It tends to be a little bit leaner up here, especially like Chris said in the beginning of the season. After they spawn and they make that migration up here, they're lean. Like some of these fish that we caught yesterday, they were like 40 plus inches. Those are pretty lean fish. You catch that fish, the end of the season, it's that 42-inch striper could be 38 pounds.
Yeah. I mean, and the fish that we were catching, there were some that were significantly fatter than others, but nothing that had like a big beer belly on it, right?
Right.
Yeah. It's even like that really big fish that we were talking about, that nice girth and big head, like had shoulders coming in, but it hadn't developed like a big belly yet. So it was fattening up and it was getting there. But if we had caught that fish 2 months from now, it's mid-September, it would have had another 4 or 5 pounds on it probably.
Yeah, I've been fishing up here for over 25 plus years now too, and I've done a lot of bass fishing, and I've yet to get a 50. But Ben and I were at we're down in Jersey, and we talked to some charter captains down there, and he said he had 60, 50-pound fish already. I'm like, what?
No,
but
he had 130 or 140 50s, and like over 50 60s.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Wow.
Which is, we just don't get that fish, but that's because he's fishing down where they spawn. So he's getting the fish on the tail, and after they come here, they eat all their herring and mackerel and gorge up, and they get bulked up.
Falling and hitting down all fall.
They're eating the whole way down, and then it's a different fish. But that's a trophy. What Chris caught, that 50 plus.
Yeah, when he said that, that's like, oh.
Yeah, so those fish, like that was those early season fish that lasted for, that was mid 2000s, and on the different systems around here, those fish were present for 4 years or so, and then they kind of drifted off, and there were a lot more smaller fish, a bigger, broader mix of fish, and then recently, the last couple of years, we've caught a lot of nice fish, 40-inch plus fish, but we have not been catching the younger year class fish, what we call schoolies. Like those have definitely been fewer and far between. And we'll talk about it later, but they do Division of Marine Fisheries do these citizen science projects where we're tracking, and I'm keeping track of some of the fish that I catch, and most of the fish that this season that I've caught have been in the sort of 25 to 35 inch range. The real small fish, maybe I think I caught one, and that's part of the reason BHA has been involved in this, involved with the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries amendment to the fishery management plan, and why there's this sort of growing concern around this fishery, because the younger year class of fish are not out there, and then on top of that, recruitment has been pretty poor the last few years, and so we're kind of concerned about the future of this fishery.
Meaning that, here's the hard part, right? Like, fishing is subjective. Like, I feel like the last 2 days of our fishing has been very good.
Yeah.
Like, I would be like, oh yeah, kicking ass. Yeah. This is great. Now, we went down and grabbed a captain off the dock last night, and we, just did your typical fisherman BS'em there on the dock, and he was like, oh, he's like, yeah, you guys are probably the only folks that really beat him up today.
Yeah.
And he's like, this was my worst day of the season.
I'm just saying.
Right? So it is like, just like anywhere, in a snapshot in time, it's just like anywhere where it's like, you can be relatively close to another boat fishing for the exact same thing, probably have the exact same stuff, and somebody's doing good and somebody's having their worst day ever.
And that's why I qualify my experience, because I spend so much time in this system. I talk to people down, say, Cape Cod, Buzzards Bay. They might be into more small fish, and so it's a real tough thing. And that's why being an angler advocate on the kind of the rec side is a tough thing, because everybody's experience is so different from one another. But and back to you guys catching fish or being in the fish yesterday, I thought I didn't have Bill's number, my phone. It turns out I did. I have under my under the work identification on the number, my contact list. It says DMF, badass fisherman.
I will tell you.
I chuckled at that when I saw that this morning.
I'm not trying to pump anybody's tires here, but I've been fishing a long time and have got to have a lot of experiences, and I was not ignorant to the fact that these guys, Ben and Bill, know what they're doing, and we were benefiting from a lot of knowledge. A lot of knowledge. Yeah. Very, very pro level fishermen. So here's like the fun thing about the ocean or any fishery, right? It's like the how do we know? And so Bill and Ben, like, we have the anecdotal experience of all these fishermen out there. And it's your guys' job to be like, right, wrong, maybe.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
How do we know?
Yeah, I mean, that's always before we drill right into how do we know, that's always the interesting thing, is that, as the on the front line, be like the faces of DMF and talking to anglers. Like, we go into tackle shops and we hear people and Chris is a very well-informed recreational angler. We get like the full gamut of everybody and telling us exactly how good or bad the fishing is, and how good or bad that connection straight to them is like, straight bass have a problem. I haven't caught fish this week. Or this last month sucked. Like, what's going on? Another guy, if you go 5 towns over, or like jump across into Buzzards Bay or something like that, they're like, holy, it's been good. Yeah. I don't think you guys need to be worried about striped bass, because let me tell you how good the fishing's been out here this year. So it's really,
and experiences are so different, right? It's like, I've been striped bass fishing for a year. I come to this same rock after work. I fish for an hour and I never catch anything. And this week I caught 2 fish. like something's going on. It's the best fishery ever all of a sudden, right?
Yeah.
But then there's people who work really hard. They kind of know their numbers. They know how much gas money they're throwing at things, how much time they're throwing at things, and they're very confident in their ability to. They have those spots, kind of like we hit this week, where it's like, oh, okay, haven't been catching, but I know if I go here, there's always bass there, and I'll catch them. And if they go there and they're not there, they're like, okay, now something's weird.
Funky, yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah, that's what it's like. It's like one of the things pulling. You talked about the podcast curtain, like the biologist curtain, like that conversation of like, how do we get this person? Bill and I have this conversation all the time. Like, how do we get people to look beyond their place?
Yep.
And like try and understand that their experience is one of many. So it's like something we think about a lot, and trying to communicate that. So hopefully we can do a good job. Now that you've asked that, but
Here's your chance.
yeah, exactly. But for striped bass, we have a bunch of different sources of information that come in. A big part of that is that MRIP survey I was talking about, where every state's doing it, and we're going coast-wide. It's a survey that has its issues. For striped bass, it's one of the better species because they're so frequently encountered. So we have a really good data stream coming in. So that's a big part of it, is like, what are people catching and what size of fish are people catching? We augment that. All the states augment that by also getting age information. Here in Massachusetts, we have a special program that's called the Sportfish Angler Data Collection Team. And if you're a Massachusetts resident and you want to sign up, you can do that. And you go out and collect biological information about the striped bass you're getting. We'll mail you envelopes and other sampling the gear so that you can go out, take some scales, write down all the information about that fish, where you caught it, when you caught it, what size it was, and give us scales, and then we'll age them. And so now we have age data that goes into the stock assessment as well. So we know, trying to manage any population, we need to know how many we think there are, how many are getting caught, and what that age structure is, that population demography is. So we get that information, and then Chris talked about recruitment. The major spawning areas, which are the Delaware, all the rivers in the Chesapeake Bay, and then Hudson, have seine surveys that go on during the summer after the striped bass spawn in the spring, and these are long-term indices, and there are estimates of how successful spawning efforts were. Because there is a relationship, like the kind of holy grail of fishery science is chasing around these stock recruitment relationships, being like, we have X number of adults, is it going to give us Y, predicted like how many Y number of babies there will be. And some of those species, those relationships are really non-existent, some that are okay. Striped bass is pretty, like, there is a relationship, but it's very environmentally driven. Very, very environmentally driven. They have a really narrow set of conditions they need to successfully, they can go and spawn, you can have a lot of them spawning, but to actually have those eggs mature, hatch, and larvae survive to a point where they're fingerlings, and then their survivorship really starts to go up, you have to have a really narrow set of good conditions and the right things happening, both temperature-wise and flow-wise in these tributaries, or it does not, or these estuaries, or it doesn't work out really well. And that seems to be the real issue we have going on right now. Right?
And just that survey that's happening in these spawning areas.
So that's like another input into like, how many fish do we think we have?
Right, and that's like the thing that gets extrapolated.
Yeah.
Because it's because it's a long-term survey. Mm-hmm. It's been going on long enough to where you can kind of be like, okay, within a certain margin of error, this is how many fish we're dealing with.
Right. It's like saying, when they do a stock assessment, they're saying, this is all the data we had in the past, and we're going to use it to project like 10 years forward. What do we think is going to happen in the next 10 years? And as you go further out, those intervals like that, your confidence you have about that and what we think the future might be gets wider typically. But a big predictor of what we think is going to happen 5-10 years from now is what are like the last 5 years of these recruitment indices, these young of the year surveys. What do they say? And then that gets fed into because typically if you have like a really great year in the Chesapeake, somewhere like 2 to 3 years later up here, you'll start seeing catch rates go up because everybody's getting, like Chris was talking about, those small fish, those schoolies. They'll start at 12 to 18 inches. They'll start showing up Connecticut, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, New Hampshire. And everybody's like, they're not keepers, but everybody's in fish all the time. So when we do the interviews, they say, okay, yeah, like, we're catching a lot of small fish. Now that's not part of the fishery yet. Like, it's not like really part of the target number we're managing for is spawning stock biomass, which is the weight of adult females we think is out there. But we can factor that in. And so those are the things that are like kind of projecting. So if you were going to say like, what's our spawning stock biomass going to look like 5 years from now, you'd say, well, what was the recruitment indices leading into that? All the recruitment indices leading into that, what will be out there, and what do we see for the catch? Like that's like our next step in predicting what things will be. And then you get to like actual landings of fish, harvested fish, commercial harvest, things like that that'll feed in.
Effort plays into it.
Effort plays into it, yeah. So there's not just landings, it's, obviously post-release mortality, like we've been working where it's like that effort, how much effort is there and how many fish are being encountered and released.
So, Bill, from your perspective, I'm laying some serious foundation here.
Yeah,
so
let's build the house.
Yeah.
You gotta dig down, you gotta dig deep.
Well, I've spent enough time around fishermen, right, to hear everybody in the back of my mind being like, bullshit. Bill, like, what's your experience tell you? Like, where's the fishery at right now? And then just because I can't ever ask just one question, what is the like from your perspective, like the awareness level of fishermen out there on the water as far as like.
Yeah, I think everybody's touched on this a little bit, but I agree. Like right now, we're not like the house isn't burning down yet, but we're at a point where we need to be concerned. This lack of recruitment that's coming out of the Chesapeake specifically is starting to put us in a little bit of a precarious position. And so, and managers have responded and they've put in stricter, slot limits and daily bags and for good reason, I think. So, yeah, I mean, we're seeing everything. And so, kind of touch on like, everybody sees what's in their backyard and there may be a lot of fish, there may not be a lot of fish, but Ben and I have a network up and down the East Coast, so we really do have a good sense of what's going on. And yeah, it's the fishery is not in this best spot right now, and that's why we're doing a lot of this work right now that we are doing.
And even like if you went out on the water and had a day like we had yesterday where we didn't have necessarily a ton of fish, it wasn't like the 30 or 50 fish days that people talk about sometimes with striper fishing, but we caught some like quality fish and everybody on the boat caught fish.
Yeah.
Would you be like, oh, it's not doing well?
Yeah, no, for me, the last 2 days were slow. I mean, I'm not going to lie.
Yeah, we were like, oh, it was outstanding fishing, and we looked and smiled at each other because, like, after that, like after we had the day, and you guys were all pumped up, we were happy with the day.
No,
we got what we wanted, but we looked and like, yeah, okay.
I think the phrase "they don't know any better" might have been said.
For sure.
Montana.
Yeah.
No, it was a good day, and I think the other thing that made me happy is that's exactly how we planned it. The first day we were going to go out and we're going to pound in the rocks and get some little fish, get some numbers up, get the footage that we needed, and have the conversations we needed. And then once you guys are like, yeah, we're pretty good, then I'm like, okay, now let's see if we can get big fish. And we like specifically went to there. We knew we weren't going to have big numbers, but the chance of getting a big 40+ inch fish that's what we tried to do. So that was great. But in terms of, we've had, much better days.
Yeah.
But it was good fishing.
But that's an interesting thing though when you talk about like the economics of wildlife, right? You have your residents within that pool of residents. You have people that sometimes fish, people who call themselves anglers. Mm-hmm. And then within that group, you have the people who are actual anglers that are going out and doing it a lot. And they're very aware of the fishery.
Yep.
And then you have this big lump of non-residents who can come in like I just did and be like, holy shit, this is amazing. This is great.
Yeah.
It's
right.
Last year we had to do an emergency action, right? Which is like the third time in all of history for all species of the Atlantic States marine fisheries is done an emergency action to narrow the slot from 28 to 35 inches to 28 to 31 inches coastwide. I mean, it took 3 weeks of my time. It was just like when that happened, I was just into like, how do we communicate this, writing FAQs, like graphic design, like, all right, like talking to people, talking to charter captains, trying to like put out fires. You just feel like it's the center of the world. And Bill and I are talking, we're all like talking to like people who are like Chris, who's like on the policy side and is drilling in on this. and like it's like the center of our world. And I go to Surfland and I talk to a guy who has a boat at my marina who fishes for stripers fairly often. I'm like, so what do you think about the regulation change? He's like, regulation change?
Yeah.
What are you talking about? Yeah. You know, like, so yeah, there's like this huge pool of people who fish all the time, but like it's not right there. Like that's exactly what you're, but it's crazy.
The charter, the guide industry, right? Like at the end of the day, what they care about is like that person having a good time on the boat. So they don't necessarily need to know that it was a slow day.
Yeah.
If they got smiles on their face, right?
Well, and that in itself is a really complex thing because the way the for hire fleet operates is pretty wide, and it varies from state to state. So in a state like Massachusetts, and this is like I shouldn't say that, anywhere, most up and down the Striper coast, there are for hire captains that operate almost strictly a catch and release business. They're going out, they're hooking fish, and they're releasing them. And so that success is oftentimes measured on like the quality of that day, how many fish they caught, or the experience and all that kind of stuff. And then there's other for hire fleet folks who they measure success as fish in the cooler, fish going home. And within that spectrum, there are the clientele that are looking for one of those things or someplace in the middle. So that becomes a very complex thing. And on the policy side, when there's a for hire community that is looking at this as a catch and release fishery, and then a for hire fleet that is looking at it as, bringing fillets home, it's a real challenge. Yeah. And then obviously there's the huge recreational side, because at the end of the day, the only thing that fishery managers can do is somehow limit mortality. It'd be great if we could bolster the environmental conditions that the stripers need for spawning success, but we can't. So all we can do is restrict how many fish we kill. And that's where like a lot of their research is coming in, particularly in the release mortality. How many fish are unintentionally dying or needlessly dying upon release. Yeah. And that's
so what is the healthiest bag limits, the most liberal bag limits everybody at this table has seen for stripers in their lifetime, and compared to what it is now?
2 fish at 28.
Yeah, 28 and over.
Yep.
2 fish.
2 fish, yeah.
Yep.
Okay, and that was when?
2000 to 2015, 2018.
Yeah. It was,
yeah
I'm not exactly, but it was about there, yeah.
And is that up the whole striper range, or is that just Mass?
There can be very localized variations. There's something that was going on for a period of years called conservation equivalency, where if a state wanted to deviate from the coastwide regulation and could show that they were going to have an equivalent amount of harvest or mortality, I should say, because it had to include post-release mortality, that they could change the regulations. But because it's that migratory fish, because it's so popular, the ASNFC has been very very driven to have a coastwide regulation for this fish. So typically it's kind of been, there's some little carve-outs, like the Chesapeake Bay, almost all of the larger breeding size fish they're only in Chesapeake Bay from maybe March to the beginning of May. Mm-hmm. So it's like if you're 28 and over, like you're just not going to get a keeper fish. So they would have like a bay-wide regulation. Yeah. But for the ocean coastal waters, it's pretty much the same.
Okay. And then during that same time, what was the commercial take?
Well, it's changed, but it was it has changed a lot. Like back, the most like robust was, I think it was 60 fish, 34 and up a day. So that's when in the heyday, back in the early 90s, and it's been ratcheting down to the point now where it's 15 fish, 35 and up.
Early 2000s.
Yeah.
Not early 90s. Early 2000s. Were you operating that heavy in the early 90s?
Yeah, late 90s. Late 90s. Yeah. Yep, definitely. Yeah, late 90s. Okay. And then, but then it's been slowly ratcheting down to now, in the number of days that you could fish. Now it was like 5 days a week, and then now it's down to you're only allowed in Massachusetts to fish 2 days a week commercially, and it's 15 fish, 35 inches and up.
So, big change, right? I mean, hard to argue that. So now the kind of condensed picture is we're seeing some gaps in our age classes. There's that steady flow of fish across like the breadth of sizes, ages. Have some big holes in it. It's like a ladder missing some rungs, essentially. Yep. Because of that, we're adjusting regulations in a bunch of different ways. Slot limit being one, total bag limit being another. Something I don't think about because it is something that's way more on the saltwater commercial fishery side is days that you can fish, right? Which like in Alaska, they'd be like seasons, right? But a season's a 3-day season or a 5-day season. Here in Mass, you're doing like a Monday and a Wednesday season.
Tuesday, Wednesday right now for bass, yeah.
Yeah, so every week, Tuesday, Wednesday, if you're a commercial angler, those are your days to adhere to that commercial regulation of 35 and over and a 15 fish bag limit.
That's from boat, 2 fish if you're from shore.
Right.
2 fish from your...
They do that, right.
Yeah.
Right.
So,
so the really key part of that is that it's also quota managed. So that's the other thing. So when you bring a fish to market, that fish is tagged and that's reported. And we have our statistics program at DMF, and they will track landings and they'll up to a certain amount. So it used to be, I think the largest the quota was like 1.2 million pounds. And now what is it? It's like
mid-sixes.
680, I think it is, something like 1,000 pounds. So it's really, and like the size of the fishery, not only the days have been limited, but the amount of quota that's allowed to be harvested has been cut in half.
Yeah. And just like, so the emergency action that we referenced 2 years ago to shrink that slot, they followed that up with going through the full public hearing process in the fall of 2023 and then rulemaking in the spring of 2024, and that included a commercial reduction as well. So they stuck to that 28 to 31 inch slot for recreational anglers, but recognizing they also needed to have the commercial sector bring down their landing as well, contribute to conservation. So there has been reduction, so we have a new quota in Massachusetts.
And I think we should, probably not everyone is aware that this fishery has previously crashed and has recovered. So like the late 70s into the early 80s, we kind of bottomed out. The same story played out. Not many small fish, and so restrictions were put in place. I mean, they did utilize moratoriums, but so here we are in an overfish state status, and we have this very narrow slot limit, and that slot limit exists in order to protect a particular age class of fish that was pretty robust. So giving that sort of narrow, or that particular age class, was it 2015?
15.
Yeah, 2015, to have better opportunities for spawning. So in the 80s, that sort of approach also worked. They were protecting a couple of different age classes of fish, and those generations were able to rebuild the stock completely. So until like to the 90s and 2000s we were referring to earlier. So hopefully, with this restriction, with some environmental luck, we'll have some good young year classes, and this particular age class, that 2015 age class, can do what it can do to help build the stock back up. So there is methods to it, and reasons for why it's a narrower slot. It's not just controlling effort, it's sort of protecting that age class, which is kind of neat when you think about it. And I should also mention that of all the Atlantic, all the fish in the Atlantic that Atlantic States Marine Fisheries manages, this is probably the most researched fish. I mean, is there anything that gets this much attention? Yeah,
I don't think so.
Think of anything.
Yeah,
Not
so
in the ASMFC.
Well, sturgeon, but that's because of the ESA.
yeah, ESA.
Yeah.
So a lot of attention, a lot of research, and these guys are too modest to say it, but Massachusetts is doing some of the best stuff when it comes to the research. And that research is going to inform fisheries managers on the striped bass board to hopefully make better decisions. And I'll also say, because these guys can't, that the ASMFC striped bass board, like, there's been times, and it's a fair criticism, there's been times where they haven't been very responsive to, we'll say, downturns in the stock assessment. They weren't responsive, and they weren't taking necessary steps because it's a political process. Now, in recent years, thanks to pressure from the rec community, I would credit it to the rec community, conservation organizations, the education that's been done. I think they are listening, and they took this emergency action that Ben talked about. So they're being more responsive. They're listening to the research, and so hopefully, we're gonna repeat history and bring this stock back. But it's a complicated, it's a political process. There's infighting within the community. Every state has its own representatives on this board, and within every group of a state's representative, there are sometimes different points of view.
Well, I don't get that. I mean, in fisheries, fishermen always get along, right?
Well, no, there's
It's not just fishermen.
on the management board. There's 3 representatives from a state.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's a management representative. So for the Division of Marine Fisheries, for a long time that was Dr. Mike Armstrong, who's retiring now, and so Nick Williams will be our new representative. But then we have a congressional appointee.
Yep.
Yeah, we have a congressional liaison who's been Sarah Peak, but she's also retiring. And then you also have a governor's appointee. So you have 2 political people and 1 scientific person. And so you can have basically a null vote if you can't get people to agree. Just like a state could be like, yeah, we're not going to vote on this. We'll abstain because we can't even agree what we want to do.
Yeah.
Or maybe the scientific person gets completely outvoted by the other 2 political people, and it ends up being like a politically biased vote rather than a scientifically best informed vote.
This wasn't always the way. This changed. I guess was it late '80s, so around I think the third changed the amendment plan or management plan around that area. But yeah, we've been in this situation where the fisheries, actually trained fisheries managers, the scientists, have sort of like their voice has sort of been minimized over time. And it's not to say that every state's making are not advocating for the resource. That's not always the case, but this has been has been part of the problem.
Well, you got a lot of the things, anything public, right? You have a lot of different interests with different levels of investment in a resource, right? So it's like one thing that drives me crazy, and we hear out west a lot, is like, well, everybody knows that private land's managed better than public land. And I'm like, well, is that a fair comparison? Right? Like, no, you don't have everyone in the world with a thought, interest in how you should manage your living room. Right? If I said, Bill, I don't really like the flow in here. I think we should move some shit around. Right. You get to say,
you got to talk to my wife.
So what's happening on the study side, like the things the angler can affect, and your research, Ben?
Yeah. So we were doing a lot of striped bass research, as Chris said. Our most recent project has been about post-release mortality, and going back to what you're saying about like people being informed, recreation. Like you were asking about, are people more informed now? You were saying the recreational community. It is really cool because like I in our kind of team of researchers, I'm often the one who goes out and talks to, especially with my position now, goes and talks to like fishing clubs and charter captains and stuff like that. And I'll get up and I'll talk about what's going on with striped bass. And a big part of the story now, and we'll dive into it now, is post-release mortality. And for years, it's been like recreational fishermen saying, we're not the problem, commercial fisheries are the problem, this is the problem, anything but recreational fishermen. And now I'll talk about it. I'll talk about how post-release mortality is a huge issue for this fishery. And somebody will start being like, bullshit, like, and then somebody else will stand up and be like, no, it's us. We have to own it. Like you're wrong. Like you got to read the science and understand. Like we need to take care of this. So it is cool, like to see the increased participation and increased awareness.
Well, listen, our first talk, I was like,
we got off that first video call, and I was like, Cal is spending way too much time on the internet. Like this is what we're gonna get. Oh boy. Yeah. So one of the things, like Chris was saying, like so we have the environmental issues, which really, and I was kind of alluding to it, striped bass for successful spawning, like they can spawn and have successful egg hatching over like 6 or 7 degrees, 8 degrees centigrade, but to have really high like hatch rates and like a lot of those eggs successfully hatching is like 2 or 3 degrees, really narrow window, right? Mm-hmm. And then they need to have the right environmental conditions for after they hatch so that there's lots of food for them, which is a whole nother thing that has to happen right environmentally. So we can't, it's really hard for us to affect that. Layer on top of that climate change, layer on top of that the Chesapeake Bay watershed having nearly 18 million people now. So everything that goes with that. So that we can't handle that. As a fishery, what we do see happening is that because, like, and I grew up in Long Island Sound, so further south than these guys, and when I started fishing, it was like you went fishing for bluefish in the 90s because there were not, like early 90s, because there were not striped bass to target. They just weren't plentiful enough to target. You catch one, or you'd hear somebody catch one, you're like, sweet, somebody caught a striped bass. Maybe tomorrow I'll catch a striped bass. Maybe this summer at some point I'll catch one. And then by the late 2000s, I was like, I am not taking out my camera unless that fish is over 35 pounds. I don't care. Like that's what happened in like 10 years. It was just like, that was the change that happened. But I also saw people who didn't start fishing as young as I did and didn't go through those years of really tough fishing, who didn't know what was going on, being like, you know, this fishing's amazing. Yeah, like join at the peak. I'm going to go out 3 days a week and I'm going to take my 2 over 28 every single day. It's like, what are you doing, man? But like, so that's like what we're going back down on this side of it. And so you have all these people who join at the peak and don't really understand, and we're trying to educate them. But especially in you know, maybe New York and up, it's really a catch and release fishery. There's more interest in harvest and keeping fish and like meat fishing in the mid-Atlantic. And I'm not saying meat fishing is like a derogatory term, just with like, there's a far more higher valuation of like taking a fish home and eating it as part of the culture more, I think, especially around striped bass. Once you go New Jersey, Delaware, Virginia, Maryland, all those states. But there's just, everybody up here loves to fish for striped bass, but we tend to eat some different fish when it's not as much of a focus on harvesting. So what's happened is that while harvest tends to be pretty static year to year, and it's a manageable level, and we have like these really good direct controls on harvest, we hope, you know, people have to follow the regulations, but we can say, here's your length limits. Here's how many fish you can put in your bag. We have like real levers we can pull as managers. The unseen thing here is the post-release mortality. So all these fish are being caught and caught again. You guys probably saw a fish that you
Which
caught.
is basically unseen for any form of fishing anywhere. On the planet.
Yep. You know, so and like we're getting the tools now, and we'll talk about that, to like get a better handle on this. But what we can't have a really hard time controlling is how often are people going to go out and fish and catch and release fish. And so
yeah, I mean, what you're talking about, right, is a culture change.
Yeah. I mean, if you want to lower post-release mortality, you can either get like a voluntary culture change through education and hopefully conservation and stewardship, or, you know, what some people are starting to freak out about now. And again, I think that as Bill said, the house isn't burning down yet, so I think it's a little preemptive to be talking about it, is like a no target closure. Like actually saying, like, not only are we not going to allow harvest, but you should not be out. Like,
you can't
by
specifically
the rules, you should not be targeting striped bass.
Right, which
is also impossible to enforce.
It's impossible to enforce. You know, we do that for bull trout in Montana on the vast majority of waters, and you know, it's like, boy, that's a pretty big fly rod. Boilers are pretty, you know, but at the same time, cutthroat eat everything, and if that's the only rod somebody's got in the closet, you know, it's like you can't tell them not to fish at all, right? So, how are you doing the study?
Yeah, so just to lay a little bit more groundwork, what all the numbers in the stock assessment point to now is that in a given year, 8 to 11%, 12% of mortality is commercial. Then all the rest of that 90% of mortality is recreational. And sometimes as much as 50 or 60% of that could be post-release mortality. So it's not harvest, it's people catching and releasing fish. And there's a number we use, or that the ASMFC uses to estimate post-release mortality, and that's 9%. And that came from a DMF study that was done about 20 years ago, before a lot of the tools that Bill and I use now all the time to do our studies came around, where they got a bunch of small striped bass out of weirs in Rhode Island. We trucked them up here to Salem, Mass, put tags in them and put them into a tidal pond that we had a gate on, kept them in there for a summer. People fished on them using fly rods, plugs, bait, all this other stuff. Saw recorded the numbers for everything they caught. And at the end of the year, they drained the pond and sifted through all the mud to find bodies and tags and everything else, and came up with a number that was like, okay, 9% of these fish died afterwards. And that was the number. And they were like, this is about small fish in this one thing, like, don't use this as a coast-wide estimate. No better number existed, so ASMFC has been using this as a coast-wide estimate for 20 years. Yep. So not only do we know that there's a lot of post-release mortality, and like that's this big lever that we're trying to figure out. Can we even nudge it, to try and help striped bass while maintaining as much opportunity as possible for people to fish for these things. But the first step, we're like, what's the actual number? Like, what's the real number? Is 9% real? Mm-hmm. So it kind of started with circle hooks and J hooks. As we went down this road management-wise of realizing recruitment was poor and we had spawning stock biomass coming down, what can we do? They mandated, and really, I think, a great proactive move. They said circle hooks work in a lot of fisheries. We're going to say if you're using live or dead bait, you have to use a circle hook. And they just, without any real striped bass specific information, there were a couple gray papers with some findings. They were like, we're going to do this because we think it's the right thing to do. And, so at the management board, they all voted for it. All like the managers voted for it. And then Mike Armstrong came back the next day, flew back from DC, walked into Bill's office, got me in there, and he's like, all right, tell me if it's going to work. Got like Bill, myself, and Mike Dean together. He's like, all right, guys, go figure out if this is actually going to make a difference at all.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So,
and we had our hunches based on our experience, so that's what we did. And it was in 2019 when we started designing the study. And what we were evaluating at that point then was the conservation benefit between the use of a J hook versus a circle hook. And so back in 2020, when everybody was locked in their houses, Ben and I and our small team of staff, we got to go out and implement this study. So how we did that was we used acoustic telemetry. This is the technology now, this step up from the tide pool.
Which is just such a great answer to the how do you know?
Yeah, right.
Right? For everybody yelling bullshit in the back of their minds right now. Okay, go.
This is built on good sound science and the cutting edge technology. So the way this acoustic telemetry works is that you have transmitters, which is the tag, and then receivers. Each transmitter has a unique ID to it that transmits to this passive acoustic array of receivers that you place in your study area. So when the fish has a tag in it or a transmitter and it swims by one of these receivers, it transmits unique information, ID, and it can transmit other data elements like temperature, or in our case, it was accelerometer. So we were looking at tail beat frequency. So it's kind of like
which you could say directly relates to health of the fish.
And that's why was it alive or not? Yeah.
Was it swimming?
So it's like kind of driving down the highway and going through the toll booth, and your transponder pings to the toll gate. So the accelerometer measured the tail beat frequency, and it could measure it for as long as within the array. So some of the post-release mortality, say like you catch a fish, you let it go, and you see it swim away strong. You maybe didn't even notice it was puffing a little bit of blood out of its gills or something like that. Up to a day or two later, that fish dies, and we can actually capture that through the tail beat frequency. So it's a really powerful tool for predicting mortality. But what else is really cool about the technology we use is, so not only can you cover a large area, like where we worked was all in the Beverly, Salem, Marblehead Sound area up in off of North Shore, Massachusetts. But if that fish leaves our array, as it migrates south, if any other researcher is using the same technology, which most people are up and down the coast, it
Like
will
for whales and great whites.
Everything. There's
sturgeon,
literally
black sea, you name it.
thousands of receivers.
Winter flounder.
Winter flounder. I've done river herring, shad.
Yeah.
I mean, just almost any fish. You talked about weak fish at some point. Wanted to catch a weak fish while you're out here. People are tagging weak fish. Almost any species you would think of, they're out there.
And there's receivers out there, and even with the offshore wind now, all those offshore wind areas now are starting to have acoustic receivers. So really expanding east where we've ever been able to look before.
And it's every agency has a certain amount of resources. So this is pretty awesome because you get to run your study and it can get picked up on other, you get to spread out amongst other resources. Right?
And we're all a member of a network, and Atlantic Coast Telemetry Network. And so there's like agreements. We all go in as researchers and we're like, okay, here's the data. And if you use that data and you're going to publish from it, then you first want to have to contact us. We will share that detection information from our receivers with you. And then you work out if we'd be co-authorship on that or whatever.
It depends what's going on. But the idea is that the tag belongs to the researcher.
Yes.
And we all cooperate and share our receiver data. So we can't, if we get somebody tags 50 sturgeon in the Merrimack River and they spend all summer on Ipswich Bay and we have a bunch of receivers out there, we can just say, here's your data. Happy to do it. Thanks. Yeah. But I mean, if that's your whole study, you should probably make us co-authors. If half of your detections are us, please make us co-authors. But we can't do anything with that information.
Right.
We're not going to publish off of that.
And then this way, everybody kind of plays nice, and we all get to share information. And there's some people that don't play nice, and then you're out. So it's a really good system that's been developed over the last 10 years or so that we've been a really large part of. So,
but for your study, how many fish did you put your trans?
Yep. So over 2 years, we tagged 350 fish, and we caught well over 700 fish within that array. And so when we caught the fish, then we would collect different parameters, data elements from it: fight time, handling time, release time, where that fish was hooked, what type of hook you were using, a trauma associated with that. So was it bleeding or not? And then vitality, once you released it, how well it swam away. And so we collected all these information.
And we're collecting fine scale water temperature, air and water temperature as well.
Environmental information. Yep. And so then as we collected all this information, we really didn't know what was going to be a predictor of mortality, but we just collected everything that we could at that time. And then at the end of those 2 years, we followed those fish. And then we had our data set. And then the person that's not at this table that's as equally as important is Micah Dean. And he's the analyst. And he created a model based on all these different parameters that could predict mortality. And so what came to the top was fight time, handling time, water temperature, air temperature, vitality, and blood, hook location. Yeah, and hook location is the big one. So for
the hook location rose to the top of.
Basically at the end of the day, we collected all these individual data points, and then of these 350 fish, Bill or I did all the tagging. Yeah. One of the two of us did everything. So we were in very close communication throughout everything, and we would assign what was called a condition score. And that really became not surprisingly when we did the modeling, the condition score was the most important predictor because it brought several of these really important things together. Mm-hmm. And so then once we created the model, we had to say, okay, what is condition score really? And break it out into its components. But yeah, it really is hook location, blood, handling, and fight time. Those are the big ones. And then there seems to be some water temperature.
Water temperature is a big one. We don't have really warm water here up in Massachusetts, but
northern Massachusetts anyways.
Northern Buzzards Bay does get pretty toasty. But through the modeling process, we can actually predict mortality and that is has a significant stress on release striped bass and can lead to mortality.
Yeah, and it's cool. Like some of these other things are more linear. Like time can be more linear. Like so, if you think like longer time, higher chance of mortality, but it's really like a stepwise thing for temperature. Where and I think that's one of the recommendations we could make out of everything. It's like if your water temperature is starting to get north of 70, 72, 73, just it's not a great time to fish for striped bass. Like you see just a sudden uptick in mortality, post-release mortality, once you get up to 74, 75 degrees.
Right. So you are finding some things that like anybody not related to the science field can affect
Yeah.
what happens to the fish that they interact with, right? By doing or not doing.
Yeah, so I'm jumping up forward a little bit, but yeah, so we did this just for circle and J hooks, and I mean, I think you probably have seen and noticed that Bill and Micah wasn't here, but Bill and I and Micah too are kind of gluttons for punishment and grind a little bit. So I think from day one, Mike Armstrong came in, said, go figure this circle and J hook thing out, walked out the door, and we all looked at each other and like, let's do it all. like we're gonna do this, but that means that we could also do that. So I think the three of us had from day one had an interest in taking it to where we've taken it now, which is trying to completely redo that post-release mortality estimate.
Yeah, but put closure on the first one. So the big answer is like, well, do the circle hooks work? And the answer was statistically the way we fished and the hooks that we tested. And the hooks we tested were ones that were most commonly used in the fishery. We talked to captains and anglers and shops, and that's how we came up with our hook list. And it was a 6 Ogami, an 8 Ogami, 10 Eagle Claw, and then the 6 Gami octopus was the J hook that we used. So when we compared those two hooks and compared them side by side, there was no significant difference where they hooked in post-release mortality. And the circle hook is like the thing that's supposed to be safer for catch and release. Yeah. Right?
I mean, it is. And I think that this is where some of those personal observations come in. Mm-hmm. Is like Bill, we had our ideas. Like Bill was like, I don't think this is going to work from the start. I was a little bit more optimistic. Mm-hmm. And I think anecdotally, we've talked to some people, and especially different regions, who have had what they feel like is higher success with the circle hooks. And I used to, when I was fishing along on Sound, it was a lot of, you saw like a lot of what we did the last couple of days was like no tension on the bait. You want that like a free swimming bait or a free floating bait. And we found that J hooks and the circles work the same. I used to drag baits at a knot, anywhere from 0.8 knots to a knot and a half, 2 knots with a 3-way rig 60 feet down. And I felt like when I switched from J's and trebles to a circle hook, I felt like they did way, way better. We talked to this guy who's caught all these huge bass. He's dragging eels at like a knot, a little over a knot. And he was like, I love the circle hooks. Like I hinge them all the time. Like I feel like
meaning it's in the corner of the mouth.
It's in the corner of the mouth. He felt like, so that's something that like maybe eventually we'll be able to catch up to. But so that's why I say like the way we fished, what we did, we didn't see a difference. And that can be important because, like I said, Massachusetts is a lot of fish caught and released all summer long. And a lot of people in Massachusetts do exactly what we were doing.
Which is
live
chunking bait and live lining.
Yeah, and you even saw when we were trolling the fish. Like we didn't catch as many fish, but when we were trolling stuff and kind of like doing the open water stuff, we did better with not deep hooking fish.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, because there's a certain size of fish that is going to always be able to inhale a certain size of hook.
Yeah.
And it doesn't really matter what that hook looks like.
Yeah. And I mean, it wasn't like, I give them credit, the managers, when they implemented the circle hook rule, because it has worked successfully in other fisheries. Like the Bill Fish Foundation requires in their tournaments and stuff to use an approved, Bill Fish Foundation circle hook. And so down in Florida, they have some success with circle hooks and like snappers and stuff like that. So it makes sense. But I think, our opinion, it's the behavior of striped bass when they feed. It's like a largemouth bass or anything like that. They come in, they open their mouth, and they just inhale baits. Especially if they're swimming away and being pulled away from them, maybe they can't. But just their motion and how how they feed, they're just going to inhale that. And so lots of times that hook goes right back. Mm-hmm. And if it catches, say, the gill, that is probably the worst place you can hook. a bass.
So it's interesting, like to dive a little deeper into the Circle J hook stuff, since we're hanging out here. Hook location, the circles ended up in the corner of the mouth more than the J hooks did. But damage, trauma, and bleeding, they did more. And what we found frequently, and we've talked to a lot of captains that have noticed the same thing, is that you'd be fighting a fish on the circle hook, and all of a sudden you thought you lost it.
Yeah.
Like you'd be like, oh crap, and then it'd come tight again. And what was probably happening is that circle hook had grabbed something deep in the mouth or in the stomach, tore out, and then as it was coming out, hit the gills, then grab the jaw, and we'd get that. We would get fish where we'd be like hinge latched, like awesome. You see the fish coming to the boat, you're like awesome, but then you see like a little puff of blood, and you get it up, and you be like
red smoke down there.
Yeah, and so that actually brought the mortality equal. Is we had more hooks than when we got the fish was in the hinge, but probably started in the stomach and did damage pulling out. So that was interesting. Like just to dive deeper into those.
Oh no, absolutely. Cool. I mean, I think that's a huge takeaway for people is, and I think it's just important for all the stuff that we've covered today. Fishing is so anecdotal, it's so personal. It's culture embedded for you fish certain things certain ways in certain areas, and this study is just kind of a great foundation out there for people to be like, well, here's some folks who had a lot more tools to actually know, right? Versus guess what happens to that fish when it gets released. And if you switch this method and use a different hook, you can have a different result. If you move away from this method and fish that same fish in that same spot with a different method, you can have a better result, as in the fish is more than likely going to swim away and be healthy when you release it, or like you said, avoid that water temperature, right?
Yeah. So I mean, what we did is we had the cool upside that we didn't see the big difference in circles and J's like we had hoped to when we started, but we now had this predictive model where we could apply it to any gear type, any type of lure that we wanted to. So that's what brought you out here, is we transitioned to doing this citizen science project for the last year and a half. And we're continuing it through 2024, where instead of Bill and I and some of our other staff and friends going out and catching fish, which I'm proud of what we did. We caught a lot of fish over 2 years. We put it kind of in the hands of anglers and said, tell us what you're using, record these core data elements that we think are important, and give us the data so we can estimate mortality for swimming plugs, for soft plastics, for all these different gear types, tube and worm, whatever you're using. We can cut out flutter spoon. We can come up with a post-release estimate for all of these different things. And so again, like 700 fish, I think we did well. 1 year of citizen science data brought 3,600 fish in.
In fact, I looked just today anticipating this, and we have now 5,000 fish that have been reported to Division of Marine Fisheries by citizen scientists with observation associated. That's out of, we've had over almost 1,000 people sign up now for our study to help to be a citizen scientist.
Yeah, and what makes you a citizen scientist?
So if you want to help out Division of Marine Fisheries, you can go to our website and you can register. Basically, we have an online form. You fill out your information. It's mass.gov/Stripah, spelled with one P. And then we will send you a package, a data collection package. It includes a measuring tape, data logs, a thermometer, so you can do air and water temperature. And if you collect that information,
and a stopwatch.
Yeah.
It's a stopwatch.
There's some muscle memory here, kids, especially if you're fishing with the pros. So yeah, you'll see this on the YouTube channel and elsewhere in the future. But the intent here was to follow the last couple of days this method, right? Which is record the fight time, record the handling time, record the location of the hook, and the type of fishing.
Trauma.
Where the hook
is blood present
and was it located, and then what did it do when you let it go?
Right.
Did it swim away fast, slow, or not at all?
Yeah, and like you noticed with the Sluggo that had 2 hooks rigged into it, So that would like be a difference in a lure type. Like almost everything else we were doing was live and dead bait. So we had what hook did we catch it on? Was it the 6 ogami, the 8 ogami, whatever other hook we were using. But then when you started sight casting to those fish with that sluggo, Bill was like, how many hooks did you have in there? Because that would be like in the lure information, which we want to know, because we can talk about different types of lures at different number of hook points. There's 2 hook points. There's 2 singles on that. Mm-hmm. And now did one get in it? Or did both get in it? And what were the injuries with those 2 hooks?
Associated with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
and I say there's muscle memory here too, because if you're like me, you get super excited about fishing, right? And this would be a way for you to become a next level angler, is to have the presence of mind to get that hook set, come tight on the fish, and then start a stopwatch, which is insanely difficult.
It is.
Or just remember to do.
Yeah.
Especially when it's a big fish.
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
hard.
But I think that's a good way for folks listening to differentiate themselves from other anglers. They're like, well, I can do this.
Some coach out there in the water.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, we recognize it is not like an easy thing, and especially if there's like a wide open bite, you're going to stop and record information and all that. So Bill and I have always said, like, you don't have to record every single fish you catch on a trip. If you catch 5 fish on a trip and you get 2 or 3 of them, great.
Yeah, it adds to the...
Yeah, don't feel like it's an all or nothing proposition. Just get us whatever you can.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's just a way that, as we know, like stripers are a big part of these communities. They're something that anglers like myself, from shows and magazines and stuff, like you're like, God, I want to make it out there and do that one day, right? Yeah. Like it's a big draw for anglers to travel and come do, and this is a way for everybody to participate in the health of the fishery, like the longevity of those opportunities, right? So,
and I think one of the coolest parts of this whole study, because there's a lot of citizen science opportunities out there across like wildlife, biology, fishing, and things like that. But what I like about this, and we went to these guys and said, like, how can we help? Like, what can we do to support this and make sure this stuff happens? They came back to us and said, like, there's this great opportunity to do a data viewer. Like, we're going to upload this data and we can present this data to the public. So it's not like you're just throwing it into some database. You can actually go and see how your data and everybody else's data is like what it means, what it's looking like at this point in time. And you guys are updating it a couple times a week, correct?
Yeah, almost near real time.
Yeah. So, and already I've heard stories of some tackle manufacturers looking at this data and making tweaks to their gear. And so that's been pretty cool to be involved with that, to help contribute to, as an organization, help contribute to that data portal, so people can learn from it in real time. So
I'd say it's a significant contribution that BHA has given DMF the ability to do that, because a lot of people are motivated by the citizen scientist, the angler that's going out, because we have covers covers the spectrum, the type of anglers we have, but we have some really dedicated hardcore anglers, and they're the guys that love to read that stuff. And thanks to these guys, we've been able to create this informative data portal that's very informative and really break it down, like every aspect of fishing between the fight time and the impacts. Like if you're a fly fisherman, right, you want to know what the impacts of that single hook before we even put this out. You can go right now and click on that, and you can look up what a fly does and the impact on a striped bass when you release that.
Yeah, it's been really amazing. A big draw for us too is we hope it cuts down on that bullshit factor.
Yeah.
People sitting there like we're showing you the data.
Yeah. What does Mass Fisheries actually do?
What are these guys actually doing? And they're saying stuff, but is it real?
I give them a whole $10 every year. What the heck?
They can really see the data coming in, and hopefully, I think it has helped. Like Chris was saying, there's people who are already not only are there tackle manufacturers who are making changes, but there are plenty of anglers who are taking it upon themselves to go out and buy single hooks and replace their treble hooks with singles and figure out how to fish stuff that are going to have less impact. somebody printed this out and brought it here. So this is like, it was really cool. So the last year, where BHA has been sponsoring this data portal, we've had just the raw data that comes in. We haven't put direct mortality estimates out of that data that we're calculating on the website because we had to get our model through peer review, kind of get that stamp of approval on it. We just got that a couple weeks ago. So we're going to be changing the data portal. So not only will it show the raw data, but it'll show a mortality estimate associated from all these different gear types with it. So people can actually look and say like, all right, today I'm going to go target straight bass. I have some mackerel in the freezer. I could chunk them up and throw it. Like that's an 8.3% mortality. Well, I could also go use soft plastics, and that's like a 2.2. Maybe I'll go do the soft plastics. Or like, I love fishing topwater, like Zara Spook, walking the dog type lures. Holy crap, a surface lure with double trebles is like also an 8% mortality rate. But if you swap that out to a single J hook, it goes down to like a 4.1. And like these numbers are going to, I'm throwing like right where they are right now. Like we've gotten almost 1,500 data points added to our set this year. So they're going to be just like everything else. They'll be updated throughout this project, but we're going to be able to put the direct mortality estimates.
And if your goal is the keeper fish, you can fish one thing. If your goal, or if your spot that you like to go to, like never has a keeper fish, and you're just there to catch fish, you can adjust your game for that.
Or if you're going out and you're grinding, you might want to just catch 1 or 2 fish a day, keep grinding with the treble. But if you're out there and you got foamers and they're just blitzing all over the place and you're just throwing that Zara Spook with those 2 double trebles, maybe switch it up to a single hook lure, change your technique.
Yeah. And then Chris, what is hit us with what's happening on the policy side of things, since you got called out as the policy guy.
So, right now, I think a lot of people are kind of anxious to sort of see the next stock assessment, and also we're probably a few weeks out from the Young a Year report.
Index, yeah.
The Young
a little longer than that.
Okay, so I think a lot of people are interested in that. We did come off what seems like a pretty good winter spring in terms of like the environmental conditions. So hopefully this particular season will produce. But the next big meeting for the Striped Bass Board is in October, I believe. So I think we're going to sort of get some figures to see like how this narrowing of the slot has impacted. What's the future of of this emergency action? Is that going to get changed? Policy advocates are always waiting to sort of gauge the responsiveness and like how willing the board is to listening to the science and the participants in the space. Obviously at BHA we're primarily representing the recreational angler. And I think we're in a unique position where we have a broad swath of recreational anglers. We're not like a single niche kind of angler. We've got people who are going to go out and want to take that fish home. And which is
also
great.
here, if you fish more than 2 days a week, you're a recreational angler, right?
Yeah. So
for this particular species.
So I think we're just going to wait and sort of see. Like I said earlier in the conversation, I think the board has turned in a direction that like we're pretty happy with, being more responsive, recognizing the status of the fishery. But the real thing is, right now, because we've been in an overfish state, the Striped Bass Board is mandated by law to recover this population by, the deadline is 2029. So that's where we're kind of waiting and seeing, like, are we going to get there? Are we going to hit that point in time where we can say, yep, the actions that they were compelled to take have made a difference, and we can classify this stock as not overfished.
And how does BHA weigh in here?
So typically, for the longest period of time, I'd say since 2018, 2019, we've been more engaged in the policy side, getting our membership to speak up, to reach out to the Striped Bass Board, to reach out to their individual fishing representatives or state representatives on the ASMFC board. We provide lots of information. Our take is we want to manage this fish for future abundance. Like we want our kids, our grandkids, to fish for these fish and have that connection to this resource. So we are advocating for future abundance and recovery. So we've had people do action alerts. We've had people testify up and down the Stripah coast. And that's one of the cool things. We've have every chapter up and down the Eastern Seaboard engaged in this on the same page. Even though we represent different fishing cultures and stuff like that, that BHA community up and down the coast has been great. And when there's a call to action, the response has been tremendous. When you look at the breakdown of the public information, in terms of fishing organizations, we've been pretty consistently at the top of outreach from our community, which is awesome, and we hope that continues.
Well, if folks want to get involved with that, where do they find you?
So best thing to do is to check out the BHA website. All of our striped bass information we put there. Just search striped bass, and you'll see the most recent blog posts. New England and New York chapters are kind of leading the way. So on their social media accounts, you'll regularly see information related to striped bass, this project right here that we've been talking about. So that's the easiest way to sort of just plug it into your feed and monitor what we're doing.
And maybe jump in and show up one night.
100%. Yeah. When we put out the call to action, that is like your invitation, but you don't need that invitation. Like we've talked about like the personal experience. Fishery managers, though there's periods of like open comment periods, each state's fishery managers, they want to hear from their constituents. And I've spoken to the fisheries managers in a lot of the different states. And, I can speak to here in Massachusetts, they want to hear from the anglers. They want to hear from the constituents. So just because there isn't necessarily a public comment period, if you have, if you've had experience, insights, like if you want to provide feedback, by all means, you can do that. And like I said, on our website, backcountryhunters.org, type striped bass, and you'll find those resources. You'll find links to the research. I'm looking forward to this getting peer reviewed and getting links to that up there. There's links to joining this citizen science project, and we're looking forward to finding ways we can support the next phase of this study, because from my perspective, this study is going to be really, really neat, because it's going to be able to answer, and they've talked about it like a good indication of like high quality science is the fact that it leads to more questions, and you can already hear like they already have more questions, which is going to lead them to more research. So we're going to continue to encourage that and try to support that any way we can.
It was great when I can still remember for BHA. Like I've been a BHA member since 2013, maybe. Like before there was a New England chapter or any East Coast chapters, I joined BHA just because I thought it was a cool organization, what they were doing. And the New England chapters come along and everything, but I can still remember, I'm trying to remember what year that first ASGA science symposium was that you and I went and talked.
Yeah, right.
And when Chris was there with Mike Woods, and like Bill and I looked at each other and we're like, why is BHA here? Like, what's BHA doing here? Like, but
They let us talk too.
But also, I think it's like Mike Woods is like the most fantastic dude, but he's got like this big, long, grizzly beard and like piercing, like long hair, and he just looks like he rolled out of a biker club or something. It's just like a small dude, but it looks like he rolled out of his biker club. So it's just like, what is going on here? But like, he's the awesomest. But I mean, so I went. It's been like that initial reaction of like, I love BHA, but what are they doing here? Yeah. Like to being like, a couple years into working with BHA, it's been so meaningful and awesome what they've done and are continuing to do, and to work as partners, because I think that anybody who has worked with and are alongside state agency knows that we have difficulties, we have limited budgets, limited staff. So having a group like BHA there to amplify and assist us is just vital to getting the word out to everybody. And I think, just as a testament to how important and cultural, like what a cultural touchstone striped bass are, is that we've had tons of interest up and down the coast, and we've had great project partners that range from like a national brand like Costa donating stuff that we can give out to prize packs, pen fishing, prize stuff, then local tackle manufacturers like Hoagie Lures, local tackle shops helping us procure stuff, Surfland bait and tackle. If you don't want to do everything we've been doing was on paper. If you're not a paper type of person, we just totally with some funding assistance from ASGA, but like putting a ton of money in of their own time of their own. The Got One fishing app has created a whole way to do if you're an app person, like they've built it into their app so you can submit data straight into the study. So it's been fantastic to have see the support from the community and get that help getting the word out and getting data coming in. We run 3 prizes a month for people who submit data. When you first submit any data, you get a free pair of pliers, and then every time you submit data, you get entered into that monthly raffle drawing where we have a bunch of Hoagie Lures, Costa hats, rods and reels. So it's been really, really
some
cool.
Incentives.
Yeah. So
outside of the fish.
Yeah, and you can find us on the internet or on social media at Mass Marine Fisheries on Instagram, Massachusetts Division of Marine Fisheries on Facebook, and anything related to this study, like Bill said.
Do you have to be fishing in mass waters to contribute to the survey?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you. Yeah, so a big part of what we're doing is trying to get people from anywhere on the Stripah coast to submit data.
Sweet.
You do not need to be a Massachusetts resident to do this.
Great.
And Bill and I spent a lot of time this winter talking to other agencies in the Mid-Atlantic, and we went down to the New Jersey Fishing Expo, which was a really cool time.
That was great.
And we signed up a bunch of anglers there and talked to a bunch of anglers there.
Hearing anglers' perspectives from other areas, I think that was one of the most interesting things.
Absolutely.
People just love this fish. And the other thing I want to follow up was I just want to say thanks to Meat Eater and crew, because as Ben alluded to, it's tough for us to get outreach out. We have a really good social media guy, but we're the government. And to come from the Meat Eater crew and your organization it's really beneficial to us. And we're really appreciative of the opportunity to talk to you guys today.
Thank you for letting me suck some fishing knowledge out of you guys. That was awesome. I mean, to tie back into what we said at the very beginning, these guys know what they're doing. And part of that's state sponsored. Like you guys took this study on, you had to go catch fish.
Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely.
You got to catch them to let them go and see how they do.
Yeah.
We have to do a lot for our jobs. There's a lot of hoops. There's a lot of restrictions. But at the end of there's a lot of days we get paid to go fishing. We have to do it a certain way, and it's important. But it's pretty awesome.
Yeah. In the end of the day, it's work. But I think I got the best job in the world.
Yeah, 100%.
And I get asked a lot on the show. What's a good way to just get involved? Are there careers in conservation?
There are careers in conservation. You want to go I'll go first.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different ways. You can follow my path, which is really hands-on. After I got out of college, I became an observer, get that baseline. I mean, that's the best way to learn about fisheries. And then stay active, volunteer if you have to, and get that lower level job and just work your way up through the chain. That's what worked for me.
It worked for Bill. I'll come in slightly younger than Bill and be like, there are ways forward through that path now, but it's increasingly becoming like a really expertise-driven field. So when there are these seasonal positions which are great entryways, right? And there's nothing better than having the staff at an agency know who you are and being a known quantity, coming in, working hard and doing well. But I think that for most people in an agency now, you're going to need a minimum master's degree if you really want to move forward with your career. Bill's got a practical master's or PhD. He gets it all, which is awesome. But sometimes that's not going to be available And I mean, I think, I hire seasonals now. I get PhDs applying. I have masters applying to be for like a 3-month seasonal position. But if you want to do this job, I think like the 3 pieces of advice I would give are that, recognize you're going to have to get an advanced degree if you really want that job and to move forward with it. Recognize that you might think you're smart, but you're not by any means the smartest person in the room. So that you're going to have to work harder. Like you're going to just like, I think what you probably did see is that Bill and I were like playing A, B, C, D, and like, what do we have to do to that? We'll pick that up. We'll move this. We'll do that. Like, let's re-rig this whole rod. But it's like that's just this microcosm of like, you're gonna have to work your way through every little problem. You saw it in the fishing aspect that we're doing that for everything. So you're just gonna have to work harder than everybody else if you want to be successful. And especially when you're young, the final thing I would say is be willing to move. Like that is there are fisheries jobs. There's always a fisheries job open somewhere, and you just got to be willing to move, even if you really want to be that place-based person and come back to where you were. Sometimes the actual route is going to be a little bit more circuitous, going around and moving to Alaska and be an observer in Alaska for 6 months.
Yeah, that's
and
the
then
truth.
you'll get a job somewhere else, and then you may end up, you're going to, because if Bill sees somebody apply for his job who has 6 months of Alaska fisheries observing time and then like a year in Rhode Island or something, he's like, I'm pretty sure you're going to be my person. Yeah. Like, or if I see that, I'm pretty sure. Like, if you could hack it in the Bering Sea for 6 months with with 3-week, 4-week cruises and all this stuff,
You might be able to mate on my boat.
You might be able to mate on Bill's boat. So yeah, it's like, and it's a very small community. All these fisheries and wildlife agencies, people all over the place. Yeah. So go out. You're not hurting yourself by traveling, because if you go out and work for somebody in Colorado. It's bizarre, but I probably, like, by either directly or, like, 1 degree of separation, be like, I know who that is. I can call them and find out about you. And so I think those would be the big things I would say. Those are, like, the standard pieces of advice I have.
Just sort of observing some of the staff that you guys have, and I was at the Gloucester headquarters yesterday with Matt. Those X-Factor skills, being able to back a trailer down a ramp, having good instincts on the boat, on the deck. Like all those things, like it's not just, crushing it academically. I think you gotta
Some
maintain gear, problem solve, like all those things are like, that's like a consistent characteristic I see in the state agency, like top, like contributing people. So yeah,
That's
you guys definitely have that.
It is.
Try hard, put yourself out there.
Yeah, from the Cal school skill set, it's like my interview form. I have like academic stuff, science stuff, and it's like, how are you with power tools? Can you do DC wiring? There is like, how many times have you used a table saw? Like, can you back a trailer? Like, Bill. All
right, that's all we got for you this week. Thank you so much for listening, guys. Thank you so much. It was super fun. Can't wait to see how the video turns out.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
It's going to be
see if
fantastic.
we're sucking in our beer bellies deep enough.
Gotta see the big 40-inch fish.
Yeah.
42.
Yeah. Thanks again. We'll talk to you next week. Always write in to ASKCAL. That's askcal@meateater.com. If you have questions for Chris at BHA or Bill and Ben at Mass Fisheries, send them in. We can always get these guys back on and get them answered. Or I can pick them up for you and get them back to you. So thanks again. We'll talk to you next week.